For 2,000 years, people have been, looking up at the sky, just waiting for the stars to fall and the world to burn.
Right, the classic doomsday scenario.
Exactly. I mean, you see it in pop culture, you see it on the news, you see it in the sheer number of people building, like, underground doomsday bunkers right now.
Oh, yeah. Bunkers are a booming business.
They really are. We just have this deep-seated, almost, I don't know, almost genetic anxiety about the apocalypse. The prevailing narrative out there is that one day, some massive cosmic event like a meteor or divine fire or a literal dragon is going to just rip the physical Earth to pieces.
Which is a terrifying thought, obviously.
Pretty terrifying. But what if we've been reading the apocalyptic blueprints completely wrong this whole time? Like, what if the quote-unquote end of the world isn't a geological disaster at all?
That is the big question.
Right. What if it already happened once, right under humanity's nose, and it was actually this massive moral collapse rather than, a planetary explosion?
I mean, it completely reframes how we interact with history, doesn't it?
It changes everything.
Because if you look closely at these ancient texts, and I mean, really looking at the original language, the internal logic of the authors themselves, the apocalyptic imagery was never meant to be some Hollywood script for an asteroid impact.
Right, and that's exactly the massive paradigm shift we are getting into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are thrilled you are joining us for this one. Today, we are taking a massive stack of research regarding ancient scriptures, prophetic timelines, and this incredibly complex 6,000-year cycle of human spiritual evolution, and, well, we are going to decode it.
It's going to be quite the journey.
Oh, buckle up. Because if the framework we are looking at today holds up, everything you thought you knew about the Book of Revelation, or the ancient definition of the word Israel, and even why parables exist in the first place, it's all about to get totally flipped on its head.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think we have to start at the foundational layer, which is the language itself. Because, honestly, the biggest mistake people make when approaching these texts is treating them like a straightforward historical diary.
Or like a direct newspaper report from the future.
Exactly, which is how almost everyone reads it today. They read, a beast with 7 heads, and they instantly try to figure out what literal biological monster is going to climb out of the ocean.
Right, they're looking for Godzilla.
They are. But the framework we are exploring today posits something entirely different. It suggests that these prophetic scriptures are fundamentally, intentionally encrypted.
Encrypted, like a code.
Yes, like a military-grade code. They're not written clearly on purpose. The texts operate utilizing parables and metaphors to intentionally seal the actual meaning away from the reader.
Okay, stop right there. Time out. I have to push back on this immediately because when I hear the word parable, it usually conjures up, Aesop's fables.
Sure, the tortoise and the hare.
Exactly. Or the Good Samaritan. It's a nice little moral story about planting seeds or helping your neighbor that you teach to kids in Sunday school. It's supposed to make things easier to understand, not harder. So why would a supposedly divine, universally loving source of wisdom intentionally hide the truth in a complicated riddle?
That is the exact paradox we need to unravel here. Because you're right, if the goal is universal salvation or global enlightenment, speaking in riddles seems, well, incredibly counterproductive.
It seems like the worst possible communication strategy.
Right. But let's look at the why. Why use encryption at all? The historical and theological argument presented in the research is that this was a necessary cosmic security measure.
Cosmic security? What?
Yeah. The texts themselves actually claim this encryption was designed to prevent interference from opposing spiritual forces. Entities often categorized as demonic or adversarial. The goal was to keep the divine blueprint hidden until the exact historical moment it was supposed to be enacted.
Wait, hold on. How does a story trick a demon? I mean, if we are talking about highly intelligent, metaphysical, spiritual entities, which is the context of these ancient texts, wouldn't they be able to read between the lines better than a human?
You would think so, yes.
You're telling me a divine being used a metaphor about a farmer planting wheat, and the forces of ultimate evil just scratched their heads and walked away. That feels a bit thin to me.
It's a completely fair critique if you look at it just as a riddle to be outsmarted by sheer intellect. But it's not about outsmarting a brain, it's about the mechanics of prophecy itself. The encryption isn't just a clever puzzle. The mechanism of the cipher is time and physical reality.
What do you mean by that? Time is the cipher.
Think of it like a two-factor authentication system.
Ooh, I like that. Like on my phone.
Exactly like on your phone. The written prophecy, the parable itself, is only the first part of the code. It's the prompt. The second part of the code, the key that actually unlocks the meaning, is the physical fulfillment of that prophecy actually playing out on the stage of human history.
Oh, I see.
Until the real-world events actually happen, the parable remains a completely locked system. So an adversarial entity can read the parable all day long for centuries, but without the physical reality arriving to map onto those metaphors, they cannot preemptively sabotage the plan.
Because they don't know what it looks like in the real world yet.
Precisely. They can't stop an event if they don't know the exact parameters of how it will physically manifest.
Oh, that is fascinating. So it's basically like a one-time pad in cryptography. You can have the encrypted message sitting on your desk for 2,000 years, stare at the letters all you want, but without the specific decryption key, which in this case is a literal historical event, it is mathematically, or I guess spiritually, impossible to read it.
That's a great analogy. And what's fascinating here is that there is ancient precedent for this exact logic within the texts themselves.
Really? Where?
In Isaiah chapter 46, there's this very specific claim. It says, "I make known the end from the beginning."
Meaning the whole timeline was drafted before it started.
Right. But then you go over to the book of Daniel, chapter 12, where Daniel receives these massive, terrifying visions of the future. He explicitly asks what they mean, and the response he gets is pretty shocking. He's told, "Go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end."
Wow. So the author is directly telling the reader, to their face, you are not supposed to understand this right now.
Yes. The logic presented by the research is that when humanity finally reaches a specific era, when the physical, geopolitical, and spiritual realities finally match the ancient metaphors perfectly, that is the proof that the quote-unquote end times have arrived.
The ability to finally decode the parables is the alarm clock.
Exactly. The unlocking of the text is the event.
It's not that the end of the world happens and then we look back through the rubble and say, oh, hey, the book was right. It's that the book finally making logical sense means we have entered that specific era. That is wild.
It really is a completely different way of reading scripture.
Okay, so if we accept this premise, that we are dealing with a sealed, encrypted blueprint, we have to tackle the biggest, scariest code word of them all. The one that has spawned 1,000 disaster movies.
The apocalypse. The end of the world.
Right. You see it in Matthew chapter 24. The disciples literally walk right up to Jesus and ask, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So if this isn't a Michael Bay movie with asteroids hitting Paris and the oceans boiling over, what is the mechanism? What is actually ending?
Well, to find the mechanism, we have to look for the internal counterbalances within the text itself. Does the text actually support a literal destruction of the planet?
And does it?
The framework we're analyzing adamantly says no. It points directly to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 4, which states very plainly, "Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever."
The earth remains forever. I mean, you cannot get more explicit than that.
It's very unambiguous.
So if the literal rock we are standing on is permanent, the end of the world has to be, what, a sociological apocalypse?
Exactly. It's the end of an era, the end of a specific corrupted human structure. It is a profound shift in perspective.
A completely different kind of disaster.
Right. The world that is ending is not geological. It is moral and spiritual. And to understand how the text views this end, we have to look at a rather jarring, visceral metaphor from the book of Job, chapter 25.
Okay, I remember reading this in the prep notes. It's intense.
It describes fallen humans, a society that has completely abandoned its moral compass, giving over entirely to corruption and injustice, and it compares them to maggots and worms.
Okay, time out again. I really struggle with this part. Isn't the whole foundational concept of the divine supposed to be unconditional love, grace, mercy?
That is the standard modern theological view, yes.
Right, so calling humanity maggots sounds incredibly vindictive. It sounds cruel. How do you reconcile the idea of a loving creator with this kind of utter disgust? Because that imagery feels like it belongs to an angry, petty deity, not a universally loving one.
It's a completely natural reaction to recoil from that imagery because, let's be honest, it wounds our human ego. But let's look at the psychology of moral decay from the perspective of absolute purity.
Okay, I'm listening.
The framework argues that true love and true justice cannot coexist with willful corruption. Think about it this way. Do maggots find other maggots disgusting?
No. I assume they quite happy in the garbage.
Right. In a deeply corrupt society, the people participating in that corruption don't think they're disgusting. They think they are just doing business, they are surviving, they are playing the game.
Wow, yeah.
But from the vantage point of a perfectly holy, pure divine entity, humanity's profound moral decay, the exploitation of the poor, the betrayals, the systemic cruelty, is fundamentally repulsive. It's not petty anger. It is the natural, objective reaction of purity encountering absolute rot.
Just as you would view a house totally infested with worms.
Exactly. A perfectly pure divine presence views a morally bankrupt generation the exact same way.
You know, if I think about it in terms of human justice, it actually starts to make sense.
How so?
Well, think about how you, the listener, feel when you turn on the news and see a story about, I don't know, a charity that was actually just a front to steal money from vulnerable people, or some massive corporate cover-up that poisoned a town's water supply.
You feel sick.
You feel a physical knot in your stomach. You feel actual visceral disgust. You don't look at those perpetrators with warm, fuzzy, unconditional love in that moment. You look at the system they built and you want it torn down. You want it sanitized.
That is a brilliant way to put it. Now, amplify that completely justified human disgust at injustice to an infinite divine scale. The apocalypse, or the end of the world, isn't some random act of divine rage against the tectonic plates.
It is a divine cleanup.
Yes. It is an eviction notice for corruption. It is the necessary, chaotic, and painful process of sweeping away the maggots, the deeply ingrained systemic rot, to sanitize the house so a new, holy generation can actually thrive.
It's the ultimate deep clean, the
Yep.
collapse of a rotten civilization so something better can be built on the foundation. But this raises a massive logistical problem for the text. Because if the earth isn't physically destroyed, we can't just ignore the rest of the apocalyptic verses. Like, what on earth did Jesus mean in Matthew 24 when he explicitly said, "The sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky"?
Right, the astronomical signs.
Yeah. If the earth remains forever, how do the stars fall out of the sky without vaporizing the planet?
Well, this is where the concept of the cipher becomes incredibly elegant. If we are taking away the literal interpretation of the apocalypse, we need a consistent, internally verified translation key for these astronomical terms.
We can't just make up what stars mean based on vibes.
Exactly. We have to let the text define its own symbols. And the framework traces this exact metaphor all the way back to the first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 37.
The story of Joseph's dream.
Yes. This is a critical anchor point because it proves the text has internal consistency across thousands of years of authorship.
Let's break down the Joseph story for a second, because the family dynamics here are just wild. You have Joseph, a teenager, part of this massive, wealthy, influential, nomadic family. His father is Jacob, the patriarch.
The head of the household.
Right. And Joseph is the favorite son. He's got the famous coat of many colors, and his older brothers already resent him deeply for it. Then Joseph has a dream, and he makes the absolute classic, oblivious teenager mistake of gathering his already angry older brothers around to tell them about it.
Never a good idea.
Never. He says, "Listen to this dream I had. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me."
Now, in the ancient Near East, dreams weren't just seen as subconscious processing, like we think of them today. They were viewed as direct omens or divine communications. So the brothers are understandably furious.
But look at how his father, Jacob, reacts.
Yeah.
This is the crucial moment for our cipher, isn't it?
It is, because Jacob doesn't look up at the physical sky and worry about gravity failing or the solar system collapsing. He instantly interprets the encryption.
Right. He doesn't need a dictionary.
Jacob says to Joseph, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?"
So in the patriarchal language, the sun is the father, the central authority, the source of light for the family.
Correct. And the moon is the mother, reflecting that light and providing structure. And the stars are the children, the offspring. So sun, moon, and stars literally equal the chosen people, specifically the house of Jacob, which historically becomes the entire nation of Israel.
The family unit is literally a solar system. That is so cool.
It really is. And we can actually deepen this mapping even further. The framework references Psalm 84, verse 11, which explicitly states, "For the Lord God is a sun and shield."
Oh, wow.
So if the divine creator is metaphorically described as the ultimate sun, then the dwelling place of the divine is heaven.
Right, logically.
Therefore, if Jacob and his descendants are chosen by God, if they are given a covenant and dwell in divine favor, they are the celestial bodies occupying the heaven of the spiritual realm.
They are the sun, moon, and stars in the spiritual sky. Okay, I'm tracking with this. So if we take that ancient cipher from Genesis and plug it into the apocalyptic warning in Matthew 24, when Jesus says the stars will fall from the sky to the earth, it has absolutely nothing to do with meteorites.
Nothing at all.
It represents the chosen people, the
Mhm.
spiritual leaders, the priests, the believers who are supposed to be the moral compass of their era.
Exactly.
When they lose their divine status, when they become corrupt, when they start exploiting the poor, when they abandon their principles, they fall from grace. They fall from heaven to the dirt. The falling is spiritual decay.
Think about the function of a star in the ancient world. Before GPS, before magnetic compasses, the stars were how you navigated in the dark. They provided direction.
That was the only way sailors knew where they were going.
Right.
Huh.
So if a star falls from the sky into the dirt, the sky goes dark. The spiritual illumination of the world is extinguished. Society loses its ability to navigate morality.
That is terrifying. It's almost so much more terrifying than a literal meteor, because it's real.
It happens.
A meteor is just a random act of the cosmos. But the sky going dark, because the people you trusted to lead you have become entirely corrupt. It's like realizing your childhood hero is a fry. The person you look to for navigation, your North Star, suddenly crashes into the dirt, and you realize they were just as broken and selfish as everyone else.
It leaves you completely lost.
The sky goes dark because you literally don't know who to trust anymore. And if we look back, we have lived through historical eras where the sky went dark.
We certainly have. The collapse of institutions, the massive moral failings of religious structures, these are the stars falling to the earth in real time.
Right.
But this framework pushes us even further. Since we firmly established that the sun, moon, and stars represent the chosen people, historically known as the Israelites, we now have to reevaluate what the word Israel actually means in this ancient context.
And this is where the paradigm shift really locked in for me during the research. Because if you ask anyone on the street today what Israel is, they will say it's a geographic nation-state in the Middle East.
Or they will say it's a specific biological ethnicity, a bloodline tracing back to Abraham.
Exactly. But the research argues that in the original ancient spiritual context, Israel is neither of those things. It is a title. And the direct translation of that title is the overcomer.
Yes. And to understand that, we have to go back to Genesis 32 for the origin story of the name itself.
The wrestling match.
Right. Jacob is alone in the desert, terrified because his estranged, violent brother Esau is marching toward him with an army. That night, Jacob wrestles with a divine being until daybreak. It's a brutal physical struggle. His hip is actually dislocated.
Which sounds agonizing.
But Jacob refuses to let go. He says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the divine being says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob," which, by the way, meant deceiver or heel grabber, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome.
He earned a title through struggle. He overcame.
Exactly. And the most critical aspect of any title is that it is inherently conditional.
Yes. I was trying to think of a good analogy for this while I was prepping. Think of a highly respected neurosurgeon.
Okay.
She goes to medical school, she earns the degree, she puts in the grueling hours, and she finally earns the title doctor. When she walks the halls of the hospital, she has absolute authority. But what happens if that surgeon starts showing up to the operating room intoxicated? Or what if she starts intentionally harming patients?
Well, the medical board steps in.
Exactly. They revoke her license and she is banned from practicing medicine. Now, she might still know all the biology, she still have the exact same DNA. But is she still a doctor in the eyes of the hospital?
No, the authority is completely gone.
Authority's gone. The title requires you to maintain the standard of the profession.
That is a perfect parallel. And to ground this in the ancient text, we look at Exodus chapter 19. This is the moment the descendants of Jacob are standing at the base of Mount Sinai, fresh out of slavery in Egypt.
The big moment.
Right. The divine makes a covenant with them, but listen to the exact phrasing in verses 5 and 6. It is not a blank check. The text says, "Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation."
There was a massive blinking neon IF right at the center of the contract. If you obey. if you keep the covenant.
The status of being Israel, the status of being the overcomer and the treasured possession is entirely conditional on obedience and spiritual fidelity.
It is a behavioral contract, not a genetic guarantee.
Exactly. So when the historical people broke that covenant, when they turned to systemic injustice, when they started exploiting the vulnerable, which if you read the prophets, they are constantly condemning them for, they broke the contract.
They were no longer Israel in the eyes of the divine. They lost the title.
They became the surgeon who lost her license. They became the fallen stars. They were relying on a title that simply no longer applied to their spiritual reality.
I really want you, the listener, to reflect on that for a second. Think about the weight of titles in your own life. We call people friend, mentor, partner. We assign massive trust to those labels. But how quickly does that title evaporate when the actions stop matching the word?
Very quickly.
If someone consistently betrays you, lies to you, and harms you, they aren't your friend anymore, no matter how long you've known them. The framework here is suggesting that the divine operates on this exact same logic of integrity. You do not get to keep the crown of the kingdom if you completely abandon the principles of the kingdom.
And this conditional nature of the title is really the engine that drives the grand historical cycles the text outlines, because we've established that the first set of stars, the physical descendants of Jacob under the Old Testament covenant, eventually fell. They broke the contract through centuries of corruption, culminating in their exile and subjugation.
So the spiritual sky went completely dark, which leaves us with a huge narrative problem. Well, what happens in the dark? Does the creator just look at the empty sky and say, whatever, I tried, project failed, let's pack it up?
No, not at all. The texts outline a cyclical history of divine renewal. There is a deeply ingrained pattern here. Creation, corruption, judgment, and then recreation.
A cycle.
Yes. The Old Testament era ended in a state of profound spiritual darkness. The prophets fell silent for 400 years. The historical nation was occupied by the Roman Empire, and the religious leaders, the Pharisees and Sadducees, had largely turned the spiritual law into a corrupt political weapon.
It was the dark night of the soul for that era of humanity.
Exactly. And the prophets Joel and Zechariah explicitly foresaw this. They prophesied a time of no light, a thick darkness covering the earth. But within that darkness, there was a promise.
What was the promise?
Isaiah chapter 42 prophesied that God would provide a light for the Gentiles, a new illumination that would eventually pierce the darkness.
And this is where the astronomical cipher locks perfectly into the New Testament. Because according to the framework, Jesus arrived as this new sun.
Yes, the new central light.
If you read the Gospel of John, chapter 1, it doesn't describe Jesus as just a nice teacher with some good ideas. It describes him in cosmic astronautical terms. He is the Word made flesh. And it says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus is literally the new sunrise, breaking the 400-year night.
And pay close attention to what he does immediately upon arriving.
What does he do?
He doesn't go to the religious elite in Jerusalem and try to prop up the old corrupted system. He doesn't try to, tape the fallen stars back into the sky.
Oh, wow. He doesn't. He starts fresh. He goes to the fishermen. He goes to the outskirts of society.
He gathers exactly 12 disciples.
12. Like the 12 sons of Jacob.
Exactly. He is literally creating a brand new set of sun, moon, and 12 stars. He is populating a completely new spiritual solar system.
He creates a new heaven on earth with a new chosen people. The math of the metaphor is just flawless.
Furthermore, he reclaims the lost title. Because Jesus lived a life of perfect obedience, because he refused to be corrupted by the political power of Rome or the religious hypocrisy of the Pharisees, he fulfilled the conditional contract.
The if clause.
Right. As he says in John 16:33, "Take heart, I have overcome the world." He wrestled with the human condition and overcame. He inherited the title of the overcomer. He became the true spiritual Israel.
Which changes everything for the people who follow him. Because the title is no longer tied to biological descent from Abraham. It is transferred to a spiritual lineage. The followers of the light, the people who actually align with his teachings and his integrity, become the new Israelites.
They become the new stars in the sky. It's a total reboot of the spiritual operating system. The first cycle ended in disaster, the stars fell, the sky went dark. So a second cycle was initiated. A new sun arose, new stars were placed in the sky, and a new covenant was established.
Okay, so the problem is solved. Jesus fixed the broken system. He created a new heaven, a new set of stars, a new Israel that isn't based on genetics. We are good. Roll the credits. The 6,000-year story has a happy ending right there in the first century.
Well, that is what the majority of Orthodox theology assumes, but, and this is a big but, the framework we are exploring reveals a startling, almost terrifying plot twist. And this requires us to look very closely at the actual recorded words of Jesus regarding the future of his own movement.
This is the part that genuinely gave me chills when I was reading through the research. In John chapter 9, verse 4, Jesus is talking to his followers, and he says something deeply unsettling.
He says, "As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work."
Night is coming. And later, in Matthew 23, he looks at Jerusalem and tells his disciples, "For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'"
This raises what is arguably the most important question for anyone studying this timeline. Why would Jesus, who has just been established as the eternal light of the world, say that night is coming?
Right. If he is establishing a permanent, incorruptible kingdom right then and there, there shouldn't be a night. The sun should just stay up forever.
Exactly. If you walk into a pitch-black room and turn on a massive industrial floodlight, you don't immediately turn to your friends and say, "All right, get ready for the pitch black." That makes no sense.
Unless you know for an absolute fact that the power grid is going to fail.
The framework argues compellingly that Jesus was prophesying a second fall. He was looking down the corridors of time and predicting that the new Christian era, the new sun, moon, and stars he had just established, would eventually follow the exact same tragic trajectory as the Old Testament era before it.
They would become corrupted.
They would compromise with power. They would fall.
This is a massive theological earthquake. What you're saying is that there are two distinct instances of the stars falling from the sky in biblical prophecy. The first was the Old Testament generation, the physical descendants of Jacob, which led to the 400 years of silence and the arrival of Jesus. The second falling of the stars is the generation Jesus established 2,000 years ago. The cycle repeats itself.
The framework implies that institutional religion over the last 2 millennia has succumbed to the same systemic rot. The Crusades, the Inquisitions, the blending of church and imperial power, the modern scandals, it is the exact same pattern of the chosen people abandoning the covenant.
The new stars lost their light. They fell into the dirt.
Exactly.
Which honestly explains why the world still feels so broken. If Jesus fixed everything 2,000 years ago, why is there still so much war, exploitation, and spiritual abuse? It's because we are back in the infested house. The new stars crashed, the sky is dark again, we are living in the prophesied dark night.
Which brings us to the ultimate climax of the text. If the second set of stars has fallen into darkness, how does this epic 6,000-year story actually conclude?
It can't just end on a downer.
No, the narrative cannot end on a permanent dark night. The cyclical pattern demands a final dawn, a permanent fix to the corruption.
And for that final act, the framework moves us to the very last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. You know, the book of dragons, beasts, plagues, and endless terrifying confusion.
It is entirely confusing if you try to read it literally, but if we apply the cipher we've just spent this entire deep dive building, it transforms from a nightmare into a remarkably coherent, highly structured narrative. Let's look at Revelation chapter 12. In this vision, John sees an enormous red dragon, which the text explicitly identifies as Satan, or the ancient serpent who leads the whole world astray. It is the pure incarnation of deception.
And what does this dragon do? Revelation 12 verse 4 says, its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth.
Let's apply our cipher. Stars falling to the earth means the chosen people, the spiritual leaders, losing their divine status through moral decay. How does the dragon achieve this? With its tail. Now, we cross-reference this with ancient prophetic symbolism. In Isaiah chapter 9, verse 15, it explicitly defines the metaphor. The prophet who teaches lies is the tail.
Oh, wow. The tail equals lies. It equals deception, false teachings.
Exactly. The mechanism of the second fall, the falling of the Christian stars over the last 2,000 years, isn't a physical war. It is widespread, systemic, spiritual deception.
The people are led astray by false doctrines.
By leaders who prioritize wealth and political power over truth, by a complete departure from the original principles of the light, the dragon's tail of lies sweeps them right into the dirt.
Okay, so the dragon of deception is wrecking the spiritual sky. How do you fight that? I was wrestling with this while prepping for this deep dive. Because if the apocalypse is sociological and the enemy is deception, you can't use a literal weapon.
You can't.
Do you fight a culture war? Do you vote the dragon out of office? The text in Revelation 12 mentions a male child who is born to rule all the nations with an iron scepter. I have to ask, is the iron scepter a weapon of war? Because iron scepter sounds incredibly violent. It sounds like an authoritarian dictator smashing skulls.
I'm really glad you brought that up because the language of Revelation is undeniably militant. But we have to remain disciplined with the cipher.
Right, consistency.
The framework clarifies that in this symbolic reality, the iron scepter is absolutely not a physical weapon. It is a metaphor for the word, the truth.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Is that just a convenient way to pacify a violent ancient text so it's palatable for a modern progressive audience? Oh, the iron rod is just truth, don't worry. How do we know it's a metaphor?
Because of how the weapon is used within the internal logic of the text itself. Look at Revelation 19, where the rider on the white horse arrives to strike down the nations. Where is his weapon?
It's not in his hand.
Exactly. It's coming out of his mouth. It is a sharp, double-edged sword. A sword coming out of a mouth is anatomically absurd, but metaphorically it is perfectly clear. It is spoken truth.
Oh, I see.
How do you defeat a dragon made entirely of lies? You cannot punch a lie. You cannot shoot a lie with a bullet. You defeat it with an unbreakable, unbending rod of objective truth. The light exposes the darkness and destroys the deception.
Okay, the internal logic holds up. The sword from the mouth proves the militant language is rhetorical. So the text claims that just as Jesus was sent as the new sun to break the first dark night 2,000 years ago, another figure, a final overcomer, is prophesied to arrive to combat this final global deception.
Yes, a figure tasked with wielding the iron scepter of truth, to shatter the centuries of lies, to explain the encrypted parables, and to gather a final incorruptible set of stars.
And there was a geographic detail in the research that I found absolutely fascinating. I did not see this coming at all.
The Eastern connection.
Yes. The source noted that 2,000 years ago, the light Jesus came to the West. He was born in the Middle East, and his movement swept directly into the Roman Empire and the Western world. But the framework points out that ancient prophecies and even Eastern cultural idioms suggest that the final truth, what it calls the purple light, or the ultimate auspicious energy, is prophesied to come from the East. Purple light comes from the East is the specific phrase.
It's a profound geographic and cultural pivot. Historically, spiritual and geopolitical centers of gravity shift. The Silk Road, the rise and fall of empires' energy moves.
Yeah, that's historically accurate.
The framework suggests a global, sweeping movement of spiritual renewal that originates from a completely different quadrant of the world than the previous era. It signifies a truly universal conclusion to the human story. The West had its era. The final resolution dawns in the East.
It makes sense. If the Western institutional structures are the stars that have fallen and become corrupted over the last 2 millennia, you wouldn't expect the ultimate solution to emerge from the very institutions that are currently covered in the dragon's lies.
You need an outside perspective.
You need a completely outside perspective. So once this final overcomer arrives from the East, wields the truth, and defeats the dragon of deception, what happens? What is the final state of the board?
According to the framework, once the deception is shattered by the truth, a new permanent set of 144,000 sealed stars is established.
Sealed, meaning they cannot fall.
Exactly. These are individuals who have internalized the unbending truth so deeply, who have overcome the dragon's deception so thoroughly that they are permanently inoculated against corruption. And this leads directly into the grand climax of the entire Bible, Revelation chapter 21.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away.
And here is the most critical distinction the expert framework makes. This is not a picture of humanity dying, abandoning a ruined planet, and escaping to float on clouds in another dimension.
Which is the popular image.
Right, but look closely at the very next verses in Revelation 21. It says, I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them.
It's coming down. The divine is moving in with us. We aren't evacuating to the sky.
Precisely. The ultimate goal of this 6,000-year cycle isn't evacuation, it's renovation. It is the divine reality, the pure, uncorrupted truth permanently indwelling human society right here on Earth.
Wow.
It is the end of the cyclical nature of history. No more dark nights, no more fallen stars, no more maggots and rot. The encrypted file is finally open, the truth is known, and the Earth is healed.
That is Man, that is a massive, sweeping, beautiful vision of human history. To think that for thousands of years people have been terrified of the sky falling when the real story was about a desperate, cyclical struggle to build a society that is actually capable of holding the divine presence without corrupting it.
It completely changes how you view the chaos of the modern world.
It really does.
Instead of seeing it as the meaningless end of a doomed rock in space, you see it as the painful, necessary labor pains of the final, incorruptible era.
It is a stunningly coherent way to read a text that usually just gives people a headache or a panic attack. But I want to bring this all the way down to the ground, to you listening right now. We've covered 6,000 years of history, cryptography, and shifting paradigms. But I want to leave you with a final, highly personal thought inspired by this research.
The micro-application of the macro theory.
Exactly. We talked a lot about the light coming into the darkness. In the Gospel of John, chapter 3, it says something incredibly poignant about human psychology. It says that light came into the world, but people loved the darkness instead of the light, because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed.
It is the ultimate tragedy of human nature. We often prefer a comfortable, familiar lie to an uncomfortable, disruptive truth. Cognitive dissonance is painful.
It is. If you spend your whole life in a dark room, the light literally hurts your eyes. It ruins your comfortable illusions. It exposes the dirt on the floor that you've been ignoring. So as you go about your day-to-day, as you digest this massive paradigm shift, I want you to ask yourself a hard, honest question.
A very hard question.
If a new paradigm, a new light, suddenly arrived from an unexpected place, say from the east, and it completely challenged everything you thought you knew, if it exposed your own blind spots, your own ego, your own quiet participation in corrupted systems, would you have the courage to step into that light and endure the pain of that exposure? Or would you, like so many institutions and fallen stars in history, prefer the comfort of the dark?
That is the ultimate test. That is the only way to earn the title of an overcomer.
You know, at the start of this deep dive, we talked about looking at the sky and waiting for the end of the world. But if the framework we studied today is right, the world isn't ending. It's finally waking up. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the cycles of history. Stay insanely curious, keep questioning the narrative, and we will see you next time.